I'm Camille, 33 years old, and what I found in my father's attic one August afternoon radically changed everything I thought I knew about my family, especially what I knew about my sister. 3 weeks after my father's death, I returned alone to our childhood home in New Jersey. I came to fix it up quickly and sell it. I wasn't ready to overthink or confront the past. The years in that house had left me with both warmth and a gnawing bitterness. When my mother had passed away 3 years ago, I had stood in the same living room, taking books off the same shelves and putting them in boxes. But now my mother was gone, my father was gone, and Eliza, my sister, was gone again. The silence of the house was uncomfortable. The stairs still creaked, the kitchen clock still showed 5 minutes ahead. But the frames on the walls had yellowed and the floor had lost its polish. It was as if the house had lost its own light as it lost its inhabitants, one by one. I sat by the living room window and held my father's old coffee cup in my hand for a few minutes. It was cold, empty, and had a broken handle, just like some things inside me. Things at home were mostly routine: clothes, old books, framed photographs, kitchen utensils. Everything was where it should be. Everything was ordinary, until I went up to the attic. The attic was a damp-smelling place that we rarely entered even in my childhood. The stairs creaked and I climbed up, careful not to bump my head. Dim light, cobwebs, and a heavy layer of dust greeted me. I don't know when my father had last been up in the attic, but it had obviously been a long time. A large suitcase stood in the corner. It was worn, leather-covered, the corners frayed. It was covered with an almost thick blanket of dust. I wiped the dust away with my fingers. There, faintly but clearly written, was a name: Eliza. My heart paused for a moment. My sister's name. I was at a moment when I didn't know how to feel about that name. Curiously but cautiously, I opened the suitcase. There were dozens of letters inside. The paper was yellowed and some envelopes were crumpled with moisture. But each one was carefully stacked. Some were thick envelopes, some were single sheets of handwritten notes. Some of the dates were 15 years old, others only 3 years old. I began to shuffle through the letters. The first letter had a familiar handwriting on it, Eliza's handwriting. I opened it, and my hands began to tremble as I read. They were all addressed to me. My name, Camille, was clearly written on the envelopes, but they had never been mailed. The stamps were missing. There was no address, or some of them only had a name. The most painful question was this: why hadn't I received any of them? I couldn't bear to read the first few letters. I just glanced at the dates. Some were written the year I started university, some when my mother died. Others, strangest of all, were only a few years old. At the time they were written, I was still here, living in town. And so was Eliza. So why did she feel the need to correspond? Or maybe the question was, why hadn't she given any of them to me? That dusty box in the attic was more than a physical relic. It was evidence of hidden emotions, repressed reckonings, and an invisible wall between us. What we call brotherhood can sometimes consist of betrayals masked with a smile. These letters were the first clues that let me know what Eliza was hiding, but they also revealed what I had never questioned. I embraced the suitcase, and my legs trembled as I descended the stairs. Something changed inside me in that moment. This journey I had come on to sell the house and leave had now turned into a confrontation to figure something out. I didn't know what to do with the letters in my hand, but now I knew one thing. My sister had tried to tell me something. But she hadn't, and now I was going to ask her to tell me. I have a hard time remembering the last time I spoke to my sister Eliza. I don't have the exact date, but I clearly remember the tone of her voice, the last look she gave me, and that strange distance. For 3 years, we have been literally absent from each other's lives. Birthdays, holidays, illnesses. We've been away from it all, but this distance was not due to a single moment of rupture. Rather, it was an estrangement that grew slowly and almost imperceptibly. Sometimes, in family relationships, the rupture does not come with a scream. Rather, it happens with silence, procrastination, pretending not to care. Ours was like that. A silent but deep cooling. It was as if every day we didn't speak, we lost each other a little more. Maybe the seeds for this had been sown long before. My mother's funeral, for example. That day, Eliza was sitting alone in the living room. My hands were shaking while I was in the kitchen making coffee for my father, but Eliza didn't come to me even once. She didn't even come to me and say, "Are you okay?" On days like these, you don't want words, you want a presence. But she had no presence. She was there physically, but far away in spirit. I waited for him to come and hold my hand, but he didn't. Then I remembered her conversations with my father. Whenever he praised me, Eliza would change the subject. When my father would say, "Camille got a promotion at work," Eliza would start, "My car broke down the other day." She made me invisible. I don't know if it was intentional or unconscious, but it was a repetitive cycle. And at some point, I started to say to myself, this is not called brotherhood. With these thoughts in mind, I opened the letters in my hand again. One of the envelopes was written on old pink-lined paper. The beginning of the writing was shaky. "Camille, when I was little, I was ashamed of you. It makes me sick to even write this. But back then, I saw you as weak. I despised your silence, your overthinking, your sentimentality. The more my father loved you, the more incomplete I felt." My eyes filled with tears as I read these lines. How long had it been since I had heard such a frank confession from him? The regret in the sentences was almost palpable, but this question was ringing in my mind. Why then did he never say it to my face? Why did he choose to write a letter and never send it? The rest of the letter was even heavier. Do you remember the days when no one wanted to sit with you at school? That Tuesday when you ate a sandwich by yourself at lunchtime? I saw you, but I didn't go to you, because at that moment I thought that if I sat at the same table as you, I would be excluded too. Silly, isn't it? But childhood is cruel sometimes, and sometimes we participate in it just to protect ourselves. I remembered that day. I remembered it well, and now I realized that it wasn't just my classmates who had left me alone. My sister was also there that day, but she chose to turn her back. I thought things would change when we grew up, when we went to university, when my mother got sick, when a shared bereavement would bring us closer. But each time Eliza grew further and further away, and I normalized not calling, not writing, not hearing from her anymore. But now I had these letters full of confessions. But was the Eliza in these letters the same Eliza in real life? The real-life Eliza was controlling, distant, and avoided showing her emotions, almost as if she was allergic to them. But the Eliza in these lines? She is a woman full of regret, ashamed, upset, late but feeling compelled to write. The gulf between them was almost vast. I could only read a few of the letters that day. The rest sat in my stomach. It was evening when I went downstairs. The whole house was silent, but the words from the attic still echoed inside me. Some people can't apologize. Either they can't or they're too late. But maybe some apologies are really written to never be said out loud. And I knew this now. The silence, I thought she despised me. Maybe it was an echo of Eliza's self-hatred. The next morning, I took my coffee and sat on the old armchair in the living room, the armchair where my father used to stack his newspapers every morning, and where my mother used to sit opposite him and sip her tea. The fabric was still the same, but it had the marks of years on it, just like this house, just like the relationships inside me. I opened one of the letters in my hand. There was no date on it, but Eliza's handwriting was straighter, more even than the others. It was as if she was older, more tired when she wrote. "Camille, I shouldn't have made you suffer so much because my father loved you more than me. But I was a child then. A girl just wants to be noticed." At first, the sentences were just nostalgic, a belated regret in its own way, a classic, "I wish I hadn't" confession. But as I read and reread the lines, I felt that something else was underneath. This was not just a letter of apology. It was the voice of a guilt that Eliza could not shake off. I continued. Sometimes I really loved you, Camille, but sometimes I hated you because you always came naturally to people. It was easy to love you. I always had to make an effort. When my father's eyes were always on you, I wasn't noticed even if I blinked. With this sentence, some memories that I hadn't been able to make sense of for years came back to me. When I was little, Eliza and I used to share a room. I chose the nightlight because Camille is afraid of the dark. I got the dessert because Camille is still little. My parents didn't spare me. I thought it was love, but for Eliza, maybe it was always a sign of invisibility. In one way, this letter was a heartbreaking confession of childhood, but another sentence changed my focus. There are things they never tell you, and if one day you hear them, you decide who to believe. The sentence was truncated. It carried a clear implication. What hadn't been told to me? What was hidden? By whom? Eliza hadn't just written this sentence. It was clear that he was playing with these words in particular. If one day you hear, it meant that he knew that what was hidden might one day be revealed. But I had to decide who to believe. So everyone had a version of this story, something that one side would tell and the other would deny. I remembered a memory from years ago. I was 12 years old. I was in the car with my father going to the bookstore. Eliza was outside, leaning on the sidewalk with her bicycle. When she asked if she could come, my father said, "I want to be alone with Camille today." At the time, it felt very special, but when I think about it now, I can see more clearly the disappointment on Eliza's face that day. As I read the letters, some gaps began to fill in, but in some places new gaps opened up. Especially this phrase, "what they didn't tell you," stuck in my mind. What was hidden? Who? Why? I moved on to another letter. It was shorter, but it seemed to carry more weight. They told you that my father made some of his decisions for your own good, but I know that I was the one who guided some of those decisions. You should have learned that one day. I swallowed. What did that mean? What decisions? The university? That he cut off my money? The process of my mother's illness? I had always believed that my father was tough but loving. Tough, yes, but fair to me. I always blamed his conflicts with Eliza on her being more stubborn. But what if Eliza pulled some strings? Some nights when I went to my room crying, Eliza didn't knock on my door, maybe with guilt, maybe because those moments were the result of her fiction. I now had more questions than answers. The letters were more like confessions than apologies, but fragmented. It was as if Eliza wanted to say something but couldn't make the final point. Maybe she didn't have the courage. Maybe she was still protecting someone. And maybe now I was the only one who could answer these questions. As I walked around the house that afternoon, I realized that the things I had been overlooking for years were right in front of my eyes. Eliza's silence, my father's decisions, my mother's seemingly neutral gaze. They were all parts of a whole. But instead of seeing that whole, I had always stayed at the edges. Eliza wrote something else in that letter. If you are reading these lines, either I have become brave or it is too late. At that moment, I thought, maybe it is still not too late, but if I had to be the brave one, now it was my turn. That afternoon, as the sun slowly seeped through the roof window, I continued sorting boxes. My hands were used to the dust and cobwebs, even the heavy smell of old things. It was strange. Even the smell of the past could penetrate your lungs and trigger memories. Just behind the old suitcase where I found Eliza's letters, a wooden chest caught my eye. The chest was not ordinary. It was scratched. There was a blackened stain on one corner, as if it had been burned. And most importantly, it was locked. Not a simple padlock, but a small, cast brass lock, with a single word engraved in letters. Private. I swallowed. A locked chest was something I had never encountered before in this house. My father was an organized man. No matter what he had to hide, he always put a key somewhere. And I was right. In the corner where the same trunk was, in an old shoebox among the randomly stacked documents, I found a small metallic key. There was no marking on it, but it looked exactly like the lock in my hand. With my heart racing, I inserted the key into the hole. It wouldn't turn. Not on the first try. I took a deep breath and turned it again. This time, the lock opened with a click. My palms were sweaty. I slowly lifted the lid of the chest. The first thing that came out, a leather-bound notebook. The pages were yellowed and the corners were curled. There was no name written on it, but as soon as I opened it, I realized whose writing it was. My father's handwriting. I hadn't seen it for years. It was hard and clear, but in some places there were hastily scribbled sentences. The first few pages were quite ordinary, meeting notes, shopping lists, reminders of dates. But then the pages began to darken. On one of the pages was this line: Eliza discussed it again today. She wants access to the papers about Camille's scholarship. I guess she can't stand the fact that her name isn't on it. When I read the line, the notebook in my hand began to tremble. What did that mean? Had my father set up a scholarship in my name and Eliza didn't know about it? Why? I continued. The fund is still there, but it's getting harder and harder to talk to Eliza. How many times have I told her that the money is for Camille? Camille has always been wronged for keeping quiet in this house. Not this time. A lump sat in my throat, so he was aware of my silence. But in those years, I had always thought that my father favored Eliza, and it seemed that it was the other way around. While I kept silent, my father was standing behind me. There was more in the trunk. Envelope files, plastic-covered folders. My father had dated them all. One of them caught my attention. Camille, Education Fund/Confidential. With trembling hands, I opened it, and inside were bank statements. Payments over the years, sometimes monthly, sometimes lump sums, but all in my name. The name Camille was clearly marked on the documents. Some were marked College Application Fund, others account held for boarding school. I stopped. Not a single penny of aid had reached me during my university years. If my father had set up that fund, why did he never give it to me? Or rather, why did I never get access to that money? The first possibility that crossed my mind burned me. What if that fund was withdrawn by someone else? Those unfinished sentences from Eliza's letters came back to me. There are things they never told you. And they told you that Dad made some of his decisions for your own good. But I know it was me who guided some of those decisions. In the few seconds of silence, so many thoughts raced through my mind that my head began to spin. For years, I had tried to build my life on debts and loans, studying at night without sleeping, working 3 jobs and paying rent, but it seemed that there had been a support system that should have stood behind me all those years, but it didn't reach me, and now I was almost certain Eliza was somehow involved. You're exaggerating, my gut told me, but the documents in my hand said otherwise. My father had created this fund for me. He wrote it, planned it, hid it. But it never reached me. Was the fund still there, or had it already passed through someone else's hands? At the bottom of the chest, I found another envelope, no name on it, only the date, May 2014. I graduated from university that year. The document inside the envelope showed that most of the fund had been withdrawn. The signature was blurry, but the first and last name read only one thing: Eliza. For 2 days, my hand kept going to the same place. My old phone book was sitting on the corner of the kitchen table. The pages were yellowed and stained as if coffee had been spilled on them. Eliza's name was still there. Next to it was a note from college: Eliza for emergencies. How many things I thought were urgent back then, but now even dialing a number feels like a matter of life and death. I typed her number over and over on the screen of my phone, my fingers hovering over the keys. Sometimes I hesitated to even call her name because I didn't know what kind of voice I would hear on the other end. Would it be cold, defensive, or tearful? During those 2 days, I reread the documents over and over again, going over every receipt, every signature, every line, the dates the fund was created, the times it was withdrawn, and especially that last receipt with Eliza's name on it. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find any other explanation, and instead of carrying the questions inside me, I wanted answers. "Hi, Eliza. I found a hidden fund in the attic and it has your name on it. Do you have an explanation?" "Is that how you say it?" I was building and breaking sentences in my head until that night. Around midnight, I was sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping my 3rd glass of wine, feeling a little dizzy, but the mind was clearer. Alcohol has a strange way of making the voices you sometimes silence louder. I held the phone in my hand. The screen lit up. Eliza's number was there. This time I didn't stop. I called. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then it picked up. "Camille," said the voice. Hearing that voice felt like hearing an old song years later. Foreign but familiar, as if I once heard it every morning. And then I forgot. "Yes," I said, my voice calmer than usual. There was even an eerie coolness in my words. "I found the box in the attic." Silence. Not even breathing on the other side. It was as if the words had been replaced by silence, and the years of silence between us had suddenly filled the line again. I didn't expect this," he finally said. "I didn't think you would come back to that house." This sentence stunned me. "What do you mean?" I said, my voice a little harsher this time. "Who do you think called me to that house? It was clearly written in the will. We were supposed to empty the house together, but you're nowhere to be found." "I know, but to be honest, Camille, I didn't want you to come back because I knew that no matter how much time passed, that house would draw you in. And once you were in, you couldn't get out." "Eliza," I said, "it's not the house I can't get out of. It's your silence." The silence fell again, this time deeper, heavier. "Have you seen what's in the box?" he finally asked, in a voice like a whisper. "Everything." I heard him catch his breath, and the sentence that followed was like a confession. "My father created that fund for you, but I was so angry with him then. He always had your back. I had to fend for myself. One day, I saw the documents about that fund, and I felt entitled to it." "So you stole money that belonged to me," I said. The sentence just hung in the air. It was harsh, but it was true. "I don't know if I stole it," he said, "but I took it. Yes, and I never told you." "What did you use it for?" "For the house. For the business. I used some of it for therapy. I even used it to convince my father to change his will. Isn't that ironic?" Something snapped inside of me at that moment, because now I was hearing it from Eliza's mouth. There was no doubt, no possibility, no insinuation. I was now in the truth. "Camille," she said later, "why are you calling and asking me this now?" "How many years did you expect me to keep quiet?" This time he remained silent. She wanted to speak, but he said nothing. "Look," I said, "this isn't just money. This is a life that belongs to me being taken away. I could have had an easier path with that money, but here's the thing. When you took this decision on your own, you took my identity with you. You took my place. And then you offered no explanation." The breath on the other end of the phone grew heavy, but this time there was regret in it. "Camille, what are you going to do now?" I didn't answer because I didn't know yet, but I knew. This conversation was the first time Eliza really answered me. And one day, maybe very soon, I would have an answer for her. The next morning, looking out of the kitchen window, I waited for Eliza's car. For the first time in years, I imagined her in front of this house. This time she wasn't coming for a birthday celebration, nor for Christmas. The invitation for this visit was confidential documents, letters and sentences that got stuck in the throat. It was a little after noon. The street was quiet. The wind was blowing the leaves of the old oak trees. And then, a familiar car turned the corner of the street. Eliza behind the wheel. Her hair was in a ponytail and she wore glasses. She looked tired. When the car stopped, she hesitated for a moment to get out. Then she opened the door, threw her bag over her shoulder, and started walking. Each step was quiet but heavy. I opened the door and our eyes met. We neither hugged nor greeted each other, but there was something familiar in his eyes. Whether it was years of repressed shame or regret, I couldn't put a name to it. He just nodded and walked in. We went into the living room. He sat on one of the old armchairs in the living room. I sat opposite him, in my father's armchair, with years between us. But it was also just a coffee table. There were letters in front of me. I had them all lined up, color by color, date by date. "These," I said slowly, gesturing at the letters. "Why did I never receive them?" Eliza bowed her head. Her silence lengthened. Then she wet her lips and answered, her voice trembling slightly. "My father didn't want it." Something inside me cracked. "What do you mean?" "He didn't want you to forgive me, Camille. He didn't want my relationship with you to get better, because he saw you as his own. She always stood by you. She always called me inadequate, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly." I suddenly felt an emptiness in my stomach. All those years I had defended my father. I had always blamed Eliza's aloofness and jealousy on his own inadequacies. But now this woman was telling me that my father's love had taken on a poisonous form and built a wall between us. "My father tried to protect you from me," I said, "because you were hurtful. You were mean to me for years, Eliza. You rolled your eyes, belittled me, silenced me. Just breathing in the same room with you was exhausting." She looked up. Her eyes were full, but she wasn't crying. "Because I couldn't breathe either, Camille. In this house, everything revolved around you. Mommy was patient with you. Dad made plans for you. And I walked in their shadows. Those in the shadows eventually become invisible." This sentence touched me, but I didn't agree with him. Invisibility was sometimes the choice of those who didn't want to see. "That doesn't explain your ignoring me," I said. "You didn't hold my hand when my mom died. You didn't send me off to college. You never said congratulations on any of my achievements. It can't just be explained by my father's choice." He dropped his shoulders. He put his hands on his knees. He spoke without averting his eyes. "I thought you never needed me. That's why I never called you, never congratulated you, because you were so strong that I thought there was no room for me." "I was weak, Eliza," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "But you weren't. I always wanted you. The day my mother died, I wished you were with me. When my father praised me, I waited for you to notice me. You were never there." Eliza averted her eyes this time, because my being there would have hurt you. With that sentence, the hall fell silent. Only the sound of the wind outside could be heard. After a long silence, she spoke again. "I wrote the letters because I wanted to tell you the truth one day, but I was afraid. I thought I was unforgivable in your eyes." For a moment, I looked at her face, not Eliza, but a little girl. A child who wanted to be noticed, who wanted to be loved, but who always sought love in the wrong ways. And in that moment, I realized maybe Eliza's betrayals of me were actually her way of survival. I didn't yet know what to do with this truth, but for the first time, I began to see her not just as an enemy, but as a wounded human being. The conversation in the hall took us back many years, to my mother's death and even further back, but the real confrontation was still waiting. It was bound to come back to that box, that trunk full of documents my father had kept. And it did. I left a few files on the table, notes in my father's handwriting, dated envelopes and documents about the fund. Eliza recognized it immediately. Her face paled. She looked at the file, not averting her eyes, but pressing her lips tightly together. It was as if she knew by heart what was inside. "These documents," I began, my voice light at first, then stronger. "The original will, bank statements, fund documents, all in my name, but I never saw the fund, nor was my name mentioned when the will was read." Eliza bowed her head. She focused on her knees. Then she spoke slowly. "My father was very ill in his last year, Camille. He was forgetting, confusing. I took care of things. I ran everything by myself. The house, the hospital appointments, the papers." "And you drew up that will?" The answer was immediate. "Yes, but with her approval. My father told me, 'Camille is strong. She'll find her own way. You keep this house. Her world will be bigger anyway.' It was his decision." We looked at each other for a few seconds. There was a conviction in his eyes. He seemed to really believe it. Or he made himself believe it. But the documents, they said something different. I opened a file on the desk and took out a notarized draft with a note in my father's handwriting. "This will is for Camille. Except for her college fund, all property, including the house, is to be divided equally." The last date bearing her name was a few months before the period Eliza had mentioned. So even when my father was ill, he was still making plans for me. He was still seeking justice. He was still trying to give me what was mine. "Look," I said, my voice harder this time, "maybe my father forgot some things, but he was conscious enough to write these documents, to sign them, and it says clearly what he wanted to do. No matter what you have done, as long as these documents exist, this house belongs to me." Eliza nodded, but she protested. "No, Camille, someone as powerful as you didn't need a place like this house, and me, I was losing everything. After my mother left, my father went away. He always kept me in your shadow. This house, maybe it was my only route." At that moment, something broke inside me. Anger, compassion, and helplessness. "This house was our childhood, Eliza, both of ours, and you tried to claim this childhood for your own gain." There was silence for a while. Then I said it slowly, "That money belonged to me." It was the first time I had ever said it out loud. A desire for justice, a truth I had ignored for years. Eliza looked into my eyes. "No," she said. "I could have withdrawn that money. I may have made the will. But nothing was stolen, Camille. I did it all with my father's approval." Anger welled up inside me, because I knew most of the dates on those documents coincided with the progression of my father's illness, the days when his memory faded and his thoughts became confused. And Eliza had exploited these weak periods for her own safety, for her own roots. But maybe she forgot something. I was a child in that house. I sat in that armchair. I slept in that bed. And that fund. It was the only chance to change my life. But it was taken from me, silently, without a trace. I leaned back on the couch, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and my own inner voice echoed. "Has your brother ever wronged you too? Did you realize that behind his smiling face, he was destroying you piece by piece?" If you have experienced those moments, you can understand me. Because in that moment, I realized that what weakened me was not the money or the house being taken away from me. What destroyed me piece by piece was that someone I loved did this to me willingly. The day after that conversation, I woke up early in the morning and put the documents from the attic in a file. My fingertips were still trembling. I left the house with a determined but prickly feeling inside. One of the old friends who still lived in this city had recommended a good inheritance lawyer to me, Lisa Brenner. She worked in a small but reliable office in New Brunswick. An old-fashioned sign, a small glass entrance, a wall of invitation success certificates inside. When I opened the door, Lisa looked at me over her glasses. She had short black hair and a serious but kind face. "Camille Whitaker?" she asked. "It's me," I said, and put the file on her desk. "I have a situation with the will, but it's complicated." He didn't smile, but he nodded and listened to me. He took the documents from my hand, skimmed through them quickly. Sometimes he frowned, sometimes he turned the pages over and over. He stopped at the first draft of the notarized will. "Where did you get this document?" he asked. "It was in a locked chest in my father's attic. Next to it was his diary and background papers, all handwritten, signed." "And the documents after that, the one that left the house and all the assets to your sister, were prepared after that?" "Yes," I said, "and those documents have my father's signature on them, but he was in a very bad mental state at the time. He was diagnosed with the onset of Alzheimer's." Lisa nodded. She took off her glasses and put them aside. Her seriousness was now fully in her face. "Camille," she said, "if we have this notarized document and the medical certificates, any subsequent will can be invalidated." At that moment, my heart began to beat fast, to be validated, to finally be vindicated, to finally have a basis for the injustice I had carried inside me for years. "But," Lisa added, "the process won't be easy." "I'm not starting it to make it easy," I said. "I'm starting it to make it right." The woman nodded affirmatively and laid the document on her desk. "If the first will is deemed valid," she said, "everything your sister now manages, the house, the fund, the properties, should be shared equally with you. Some payments may even have to be returned to you. In particular, withdrawals from the education fund, if made without authorization, could have serious consequences." Something changed inside me at that moment. For the first time, the injustice that had been growing silently inside me for years had turned into a concrete language on the outside. It was no longer just a sister-sister dispute, but a struggle for rights that could be proved with documents. Lisa took a photocopy of the documents and gave me a list of documents necessary to file a lawsuit. When we finished talking, she turned to me and said one last thing. "Camille, the hardest thing about this kind of domestic case is that, in the search for justice, love is torn apart. Are you ready?" I stopped for a moment. I saw Eliza's face. That innocent-looking smile, her past coldness, her absence at my mother's funeral, and the sentence she said without averting her eyes the last time we spoke. I had my father's approval. I didn't know if I was ready, but I didn't have a choice anymore, because silence had never won me anything, and the state of being in the shadow, which I had accepted for years, wanted to come to light for the first time today. The first chill of autumn hit me as I left the office. I walked to the car, documents in hand, questions on my mind. I didn't turn on the radio the whole way. I wanted to listen to my thoughts in the silence. If this case went to trial, Eliza could lose everything, but I had already lost so much. The years of silence she had given me were not the lack of a fund, but the ignoring of my identity, a fund bearing my name and a house that belonged to me. The fact that what was rightfully mine years ago could now be taken away felt not like a victory, but like a belated equality. If you've ever stood up to someone who quietly took away a life that was yours, maybe you'll understand what I mean. Making that decision is not easy, because sometimes justice is a stand taken against those we love the most. I didn't want to stop anymore. I was going to continue on my way, with documents, with facts, with the power of righteousness. A few days after my meeting with the lawyer, with the documents in hand, I decided to investigate the more invisible layers of the past, because something was missing. Testimony. I had documents, the original will, fund receipts, my father's diary. But I needed one more thing. People who had witnessed what was going on around a man whose mental state was deteriorating. My first stop was Mrs. Lorna, one of the most familiar faces of my childhood. She was an old woman who lived across the street from our house and drank her coffee from her balcony every Sunday morning. She was a retired nurse. Her memory was still vivid. She carefully watched what was happening on the street and memorized the details of human relations without forgetting them. When I knocked on her door, she looked at me with a familiar warmth. "Camille? I haven't seen you for years. You're just like your mother." At that moment, I was between smiling and crying. He invited me in. We sat on the shabby floral armchairs in the living room. He poured tea and offered homemade cookies. We chatted nostalgically for a few minutes, and then I got to the point. "Ms. Lorna, this may sound strange, but do you remember some things about my father's last years, especially what happened between him and Eliza?" The old woman took a sip of her tea, then put her cup on the saucer and looked at me intently. "Camille," she said quietly, "there is so much you should know, but no one has asked for a long time." I shuddered. "What do you mean?" "Last year, especially after your mother's death, there was something strange in the air at home. There were constant arguments between your father and Eliza. You know my window looks right into your kitchen. Even with the windows closed, sometimes there would be shouting." "What kind of arguments?" I asked, my voice low but shaky. Most of them were about money. One time I saw Eliza crying. Before we got in the car, she stood in the garden and shouted at someone on the phone. I heard her say, "I have a right too. You can't leave it all to him." I didn't know who she meant at the time. Now I do. She was talking about you. I swallowed. A familiar knot formed in my throat. "And my father, did he ever talk about me?" The woman nodded slowly. "Often. He used to stop by my balcony, like a coffee break when he went for a walk outside. He always said he wanted to talk to you, but he complained that he couldn't see you. Lately, she would say, 'I think Camille has turned on me.' There was resentment in her eyes. But the most common thing she said was, 'I feel my daughter needs me, but Eliza always gets in the way.'" My eyes welled up. I bowed my head in silence. Did she stop me from talking to her? Asking that sentence hurt me, because I more or less knew the answer. Lorna was silent for a while. Then she smiled sadly. "I don't know, Camille, but I've seen Eliza checking her phone many times, and there were times when she said your father didn't answer her messages. Once he tried to call you, but Eliza took the phone from his hand and said, 'Not now, Dad. Camille is already busy.' I couldn't decide whether anger or disappointment was stronger inside me. I just kept silent, because these details of the past were opening a huge hole in me now. Lorna took my hand. "I know it hurts, but no. Your father loved you. He always has. But sometimes people get in the way, and some words go unsaid. It's not your fault." A tear fell from my eye. Lorna silently handed me a handkerchief. When I walked out of there, only one sentence was spinning in my head. The truth is, sometimes seen not by the walls inside the house, but by a window at the end of the street. For years I had perceived Eliza's aloofness, coldness, even hostility at times, as a purely personal matter. But now I understood. She didn't just keep her distance from me. She also kept my father away from me. And that's when the pieces that had been missing for years began to come together. The air was heavy when I left the lawyer's office. The sky was gray, the wind was strong. It was as if even the sky was preparing for an impending storm. As I carefully placed the documents in my bag, I glanced at the notifications on my phone. Most of them were emails and bank reminders. But one was different. A voicemail. Sender, Eliza. My fingers paused for a moment on the screen. It took me a few seconds to open and listen to the message. But the content, those seconds felt like a threat that carried the weight of years. "If you keep this up, you will not only destroy me, you will destroy yourself." The tone was slow, controlled, a kind of diplomatic anger. "I have completed some of these documents with your signature. Think, Camille." As if that last sentence had been left short on purpose. Even the period was missing, not like a threat, like a warning. But in the warning, there was a cold calculation. I took off the headphones. My hands were cold. I sat on the edge of a bench and took a deep breath, replaying the sentences over and over in my mind. You will not only ruin me, but also yourself. What did that mean? Which document was he talking about? Which signature of mine? At that moment, I realized something for the first time. The person who had been silently harming me for years was now openly threatening me. Eliza's games were more insidious in the past. She would smile. "You must have misunderstood," she would say. She would talk behind my back but hand me flowers to my face. But now she had unmasked herself. She was openly threatening me. Because I was no longer silent. I was no longer a figurehead in the story he had constructed. I started to make up my own sentences. But this signature issue, that was the center of my mind. In the past, during my father's illness, I had carried a few documents. I had gone to the bank and submitted forms. Could it be that there were documents that he had made me sign but didn't fully explain their content? Power of attorney in my father's name, payment instructions, fund transfers. I remember one day she called me in and said, "Just hand in this form, okay?" Eliza was always in control. I trusted her then because she was my sister. But now that trust was being put in front of me as a threat to be turned into evidence. I took a pen and paper out of my pocket. I immediately wrote down what I needed to tell Lisa, what she said about the documents, what signature she was talking about, the audio recording. All of it could be important for the case. This was no longer an internal showdown. It was becoming a legal process. Every detail mattered. But this was not just a case. It had become a power struggle, and Eliza knew it. I opened the voicemail again, listening to the sentences from a different angle this time. It wasn't a threat, but panic. It was the voice of a woman afraid of losing control. It was as if someone else had suddenly appeared on stage in the script she had been writing one-sidedly for years. It was me, and this threw her off balance. People's true colors come out when you can't control them. That day, I saw this truth very clearly. Eliza had done the same thing to me all my life. She quietly violated my boundaries and then accused me of being too sensitive. She had made me look passive, but in fact, I had only remained silent. And now that silence was breaking, like a revolution without noise. I called my lawyer. Lisa listened to the message and took a deep breath. "This is very important," she said. "Especially since it's a voicemail, it can be used as evidence in the trial instead of a defense. But it also shows us this. You're dealing with someone who is pushing not just moral boundaries, but legal boundaries." "What about that signature?" I asked. "What if he actually forged a document in my name?" "We'll have the documents analyzed," Lisa said. "Forged signatures, manipulated documents, these can be analyzed. The important thing now is that now Eliza has come out, and that gives us strength." That night, looking out the window of the house, there was a starless sky. There was silence, but something inside me was talking. Sometimes those who harm in silence. When they cannot silence you, try to criminalize your voice. I was not going to be silent anymore. I chose the cafe on purpose, quiet, on a corner, away from the noise of the city but open to street surveillance. I had reserved a small table by the window, and despite the chill in the air, I wanted to sit outside, because even a word echoing inside could affect my future. When Eliza arrived, she was impeccably dressed. She wore her hair in a bun and a pale gray trench coat, the sober expression I had grown accustomed to, not quite smiling, not quite foreign. She came and sat across from me. "Camille," he said, "did you have to do it like this?" I didn't touch my coffee. I didn't answer. I let him ask. After a few seconds of silence, I started. "When did it start?" "What?" "The things you hid from me. The way you stole my father's money from me. The trust documents, the will." He averted his eyes. He shrugged his shoulders. "It was complicated, Camille. It didn't happen all at once. I just wanted to find the balance." Balance. As that word left his lips, A hard stone sat in my stomach. It echoed in my head. I wanted to strike a balance. And for the sake of that balance, I had lost my identity, my rights, my relationship. So you hiding the fact that my father transferred money to me behind my back for years, transferring the fund to your own account, changing the documents, turning my existence into something transparent, is that balance for you? He could not escape my words. His face went blank, but his eyes moved. There was something inside him that he was trying to suppress, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or just fear of being caught. I was sure that the little tape recorder I had carefully placed in the lining of my jacket was working, the little light blinking silently, symbolizing the fact that everything I had been unable to prove until now was now an audible presence. Eliza stared at me, as if she was really seeing me for the first time. "Camille," she said, "my father always put you in a different place. He always believed you were superior. I wasn't good enough for him, but you were always good enough. There was no way to fix that, so I tried to fix things myself." I realized then that it wasn't just jealousy. It was the result of a battle for identity that had been quietly growing over the years. Eliza had tried to erase mine to protect her own existence. "And you found the solution to that by ignoring me." Silence. "You hid her letters to you. You came between me and her. You withdrew my funding. You changed the will, and now you threaten me." My voice cracked at this last sentence. I tried with all my might to remain calm, but years of repression were climbing up my throat like a knot. Eliza bowed her head. Her face was expressionless. It was as if she wanted to run away but knew she couldn't anymore. "I just wanted to be loved, Camille," she said. "But love is not evenly distributed in this house." "All I ever wanted was to be loved, but I didn't lie to deserve love," I said. Tears started to fall from my eyes, and that's when I realized I wasn't sorry, I was free. The tape recorder was still working. Every tone of Eliza's voice, every breath, every silence. It was all there. This was no longer just legal proof. It was a historical correction. It was the first minutes of the unraveling of the order that had kept me silent for years. Eliza spoke one last time. "If you win this war, you will lose us forever." "Maybe we've already lost," I said. "I'm just realizing it now." I got up. She didn't call after me as I left. He just stayed where he was sitting. He didn't touch his coffee on the table, just like me. But I now had a recording not only of her voice, but also of the emptiness inside her. The case was officially filed 3 weeks later. Lisa, my lawyer, flawlessly organized and presented the documents, the audio recording, and the bank records to the court. Eliza's own confessions undermined the seemingly inviolable order she had built for years. When I entered the courtroom on the day of the first hearing, there was a strange silence. I felt neither the euphoria of victory nor the fear of defeat, just silence. It was as if the buzzing that had been circulating in my mind for years had finally come out and been replaced by calm. When Eliza entered the hall with her lawyer, we locked eyes. Her face was pale, a pallor covered by makeup, but those eyes, still fugitive, still questioning, maybe regretful, maybe just drowning in the shame of being caught. I don't know. More than seeing the battle in him, I felt that the battle in me was finally over. When the judge read the documents, he paused several times and nodded. "The handwriting comparisons are clear," he said. "The banking documents are doctored, and the audio recording contains a clear statement from the witness." Then he turned to Eliza. "This is not a right of inheritance. This is years of systematic suppression of a right." Eliza said nothing, and in that moment I knew this was not revenge. This was justice. After the trial, my lawyer Lisa came to me and said, "We will probably get the whole property back, and if we can prove the movement of funds in the past, there could be a serious lawsuit for damages." I shook my head slowly, but my answer was clear. I don't want compensation, I just want what is in my name. Because it wasn't about money, the house, the funds, the property. These were just symbols. The real issue for me was to reclaim the voice of my truth that had been rendered invisible. Those letters didn't reach me for years. My father and I were estranged, and I had been too silent to realize it. But I was no longer silent. Later in the trial, Eliza's bank accounts were frozen. Her lawyer made a new offer, dismissed the case in exchange for the transfer of the property to Camille. But Lisa didn't fall for it. "No," she said. "She already owns the property. The mere fact that Eliza presented it as a bargaining chip could be added to the case file." And indeed, with each passing day, Eliza's hands became emptier and her face paler. One day, even the newspapers carried a small headline, "Local businesswoman rocked by domestic inheritance case." She wasn't mentioned by name, but the town knew her. Eliza had always been publicly successful, strong, organized. But now the plans had collapsed. I won. But the taste of victory was not what I thought it would be. One night, the day after the verdict was announced, I sat in my childhood bedroom and thought to myself, why does justice feel so heavy? Because this is not a happy ending. It was a belated but complete delivery of what was deserved. The war was over, but the fatigue was just beginning. I got up and opened my box of old photos. Eliza and I are cuddling in front of my mother's flowery dress. My father is behind us, smiling. There is no conflict in that frame, just childhood, just the purity of those times. But real life was not like that. Real life was full of shadows in the background of that photo, and I was now emerging from those shadows. This trial was a reckoning against my silence. For years, Eliza had been strengthened by my silence, but now that silence had become evidence, a sentence, a record of a sentence. Her threat no longer worked, neither did her mask, because I had finally spoken. And that was the greatest freedom. For the first time, I woke up in the morning without feeling the weight of the past. When I opened my eyes in bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was silence, but this time it was not an eerie, oppressive silence. It was a peaceful, familiar emptiness. The noise inside me had stopped. The thoughts that ran through my mind no longer fought each other, but took turns. For the first time, I felt that I could really shape my own life. For years, I had been so used to being a side character in someone else's story that it almost felt strange to be the main character now. Yet I had been waiting for years, silently, patiently, always hoping that one day it would be my turn. But it's not my turn. It didn't. I had to get it myself. I prepared my coffee and went into the living room. The house was still full of old things, but I looked at them differently now. This armchair used to carry my father's shadow. The kitchen was a reminder of my mother's absence. The mirror in the hallway showed Eliza's superiority. But now, these walls told me not about the past, but about the tests that had been passed. Because the ghosts of the past no longer danced over me. They existed, yes. They didn't disappear, but they no longer guided me. The difference was huge. In that cafe where I recorded Eliza's voice, I realized that the damage she had done to me over the years was not only material, but also identity. She had done her best to make me feel incomplete, inadequate, excluded, and I had nurtured these feelings in silence. But now that silence has turned into power, with my own words, my own steps, my own decisions. A few days later, I started to rearrange the small study on the lower floor of the house. I painted the walls white. I took down the old bookshelves and replaced them with simple open shelves. There was only a desk, a chair, and flowers in front of the window. When I sat there, I felt the quiet, safe writing room I had dreamed of as a child, a space of my own, a space where no one could interfere, where no one could cast a shadow, because I was now directing my life. One evening, one by one, I read the letters from the old boxes, some of which contained lines that Eliza truly regretted. But no regret could cover the truth. She was responsible for every moment she hid them, silenced them, ignored them. That responsibility was hers, not mine. And for the first time, I was able to let go of that guilt. For years, I wondered if I had made a mistake. What did I say too little? What did I wait too long? Why did we grow so far apart? But now I see. Some distance is created not only by time, but by intention. And some intentions grow to harm you, even in the people who are closest to you. But I was no longer harmed. I had reclaimed my power, my voice, my right, and my center. That day, I went for a walk in the center of town. The small town square was still the same. As I passed the bakery, I remembered the bagels Eliza and I used to buy when we were children. The flower shop I passed had my mother's favorite white lilies. I stopped and bought a bunch, and when I got home, I put them in my mother's old vase. Then I looked in the mirror. There were lines of fatigue under my eyes, but for the first time, I saw a light of my own in my eyes. Not a woman drawn by others, but a woman who knew her own steps, who walked slowly but steadily. Camille. At that moment, I realized that the greatest voice that comes out of the silence is one's own truth, and I could hear that voice now. When the letter from Eliza arrived, I had only gone down to the mailbox to browse through the shopping brochures. A thick, elegant cream envelope, just one word written in a familiar old handwriting, Camille. My fingers trembled. I sat on the stairs for a while before opening the envelope. Dozens of scenarios swirled in my head. Was this a new reckoning, a theater of regret, or an effort to say goodbye? But a voice inside me was saying, this time is different, because I was different now. I opened the envelope. Lines written in blue ink on cream-colored paper. It was Eliza's handwriting, the distinctive italicized letters I knew so well, the ones she used to caption my homework notebooks as a child. But this time, there were no orders, no directions, just a broken voice. Camille, I don't know where to start when I write this letter to you. Maybe I shouldn't have started at all because every word that reaches you so late is actually a crime of silence. Apologizing for stealing your life won't change anything, I know, but I still want you to know that in doing so, I was always after the things I admire about you. Your maturity, your strength, your honesty. It was both painful and strange that a woman who had belittled, suppressed, and ignored me for years was now writing these words. It was an answer to the question why that I had been holding inside me for years. But the answer does not always heal. Some answers only open up the depths of the past. I continued. My father loved you more than me. I tried to accept this in myself for years, but I couldn't. I thought that by breaking you, by silencing you, I could take your place. But I couldn't take anyone's place, because you are not someone who defines your place according to others' definitions. You are someone who lights your own light. This has given me both hope and fear over the years, because I was used to existing in someone else's shadow, and your presence made those shadows visible. I didn't feel anger in these lines, not surprise, just sadness. What Eliza did to me wasn't just jealousy. It was a battle for self-esteem. Every moment she didn't believe in herself, she tried to cover it with the confidence she saw in me, and I carried these covers for a long time without understanding them. When I came to the end of the letter, my eyes filled with tears. This letter is not a request for forgiveness. I know it's too late for everything, But I wanted you to know that in all the years I silenced you, your inner voice has never been silent. And now that voice has come out. This is both your victory and my greatest defeat. I'm not saying goodbye, because what I owe you doesn't end with a goodbye. Eliza. I didn't close the envelope. I folded the letter again and put it in my mother's old trunk, next to all the old letters Eliza had never delivered to me. It was all in one place now, both what had been said and what had been hidden for years. Have I forgiven Eliza? Maybe still not. But I realized something that day. Some wounds are healed not by forgiveness, but by understanding. And for the first time, I truly understood her. Her darkness was born from the reflection of my light, and I was no longer afraid to carry that light. Today, as I write these lines, I moved into a new house. It is a house with 3 windows surrounded by greenery, just outside a small town. There is no attic, no secret chests, no dusty boxes, no shadows on the walls, just light-filled rooms and spotless shelves. This time not to hide the past, but to write new stories. The moving process was easier than I thought. There were fewer boxes. This time I had consciously left behind the burdens I had been forced to carry for years. As I left the old house, a single sentence passed through me. I don't belong here anymore. And this was not an escape, but an acceptance. The windows of the new house get direct light in the morning. When I have breakfast, I sit in front of the window and watch the street. People are riding bicycles, children are running. The little sounds of life are good for me. I, who was once afraid of silence, now find peace among those sounds. The past is still somewhere. In my memory, in memories, in old photographs. But it's not on me anymore. It's not on me because I don't need it anymore. I can walk without carrying it. I realized this as I was putting away my new bookshelves. Some shelves in life don't have to be full. Sometimes emptiness makes room for new beginnings, just like the empty spaces inside me. Those spaces that were once filled with shame, anger, guilt, now carry only lightness. And in that lightness, I thought, why did I tell this story? Because sometimes the deepest wounds in a family leave the most permanent scars, and we think that by hiding those scars for years, we make them invisible. But nothing invisible disappears. It just turns into something else inside us. Silence, anger, shame, or in time, a strengthened self. This was the story of that transformation. One evening, sitting on the porch of my new home, I wrote in my notebook, "Some stories are heavy inside us. To put them into language is not to lighten them, but to become visible, because the visible is no longer alone." And that's why I told this story. If you still feel a silence on your shoulder that you carry from your childhood, if the weight of unspoken sentences in a room still keeps you awake, if you look at a family photo and feel like you are missing someone, you are not alone. I've had those feelings too. I sat with them. I fought them. Sometimes I lost. But in the end, I understood. Some silences are lighter when spoken. This is one of them. Now I have an empty notebook in front of me. On the first page, I've written my name, Camille. I have no last name, because in this new story, I'm not interested in who I belong to, but who I am. A new city, a new house, a new me. It's not closure. It is a beginning. And maybe someone reading these lines wants to write their own beginning today. So look at the blank page, pick up the pen, and write slowly. I am here, and this time I will tell the story.